Today, we're going to look at what investors look for in a founder. What traits are they actually looking for in a startup founder? This is Raw Startup. I sat down with three incredible investors, and they're going to be very straight on what they're looking for.
It's the whole kind of phenomenon of entrepreneurs, right? People who like the idea of being an entrepreneur, but when they come to it, can't really do it.
This ability to change your mind and to be comfortable changing your mind as you go based on new data, based on new insights, I think it's also mission critical.
And that just doesn't happen if you haven't got a founding team that has huge ambition from day one.
Because they might have a great idea, but boy, they're curious. They might have 3 or 4 more great ideas later.
In the final part of the video, you'll see things that I will never, ever compromise on in a founder. So stay tuned for that. So we started out with doing a big brainstorm where all the investors came with ideas and what they're looking for in a founder. And as you can see, there's quite a bit here.
The list is very long. And the reason for that is because I think there are very few people who actually have all of these qualities. And there are a very wide variety of different types of founders out there.
Obviously, it will take a little bit of a superwoman or a superman to have all of this.
They have different value. They have different, backgrounds and styles and risk tolerance. And that's incredible how they manage to leverage all these differences to build massive businesses.
Yes, all founders are different, but there are certain things that the investors really need the founder to have. Next, we voted 3 things for each investor. What are the 3 things you cannot compromise on in a founder? So this is a ranked list with the most important stuff on top. So here we go. Let's start with number 10. Number 10, hardworking. We actually had hardworking and grit on the list, and they're a little bit different. Hardworking means putting in the hours. Grit means, can you keep going when things become really difficult? So you probably need to be hardworking and some grit to keep going.
Just know that it will be hours. It's going to be unending hours for 10 years and so much of your life and so much of ramen noodles, as you say. It's all of that mixed in. It's hours and hours of all of it.
It's like it's a learning curve, but you can't accelerate that. It's like consistency and putting hours will bring you there. It's not enough to be passionate. It's not enough to be strategic or visionary. Sometimes like with accounting, right? Or with any kind of boring exercises, you just need to put hours on it. There's no way out, right?
It's the whole kind of phenomenon of entrepreneurs, right? People who like the idea of being an entrepreneur, but when they come to it, can't really do it. I think a lot of that is because they don't want to actually work hard on the boring stuff. And the reality is there's a lot of boring stuff that is not sexy, not cool, pretty tedious, pretty pedantic. And a lot of that stuff ends up in the hands of the leadership, actually, particularly in the early days, right?
Yeah.
So and some people just shut up and do it, and others, complain about it, and they won't get there.
I remembered what my coach said. You know what? When you ice skating, and in general in sport, it's not the most talented person wins. The person who is willing to put more hours and more hours and more hours practicing the same elements, that's the one who wins. And it's really hard to find those.
That's exactly right, Olga. The more practice you get, the better you get. It's true for an ice skater as well as a founder. Number 9, adaptable.
Things are going to change. You're going to change. You're going to get more success. 10 years. You meet these people when they're 20. They're totally different at 30, completely different at 30.
This ability to change your mind and to be comfortable changing your mind as you go based on new data, based on new insights, I think it's also mission critical, maybe as much as ambitious, because if you just dig in and, you're no longer relevant, it doesn't really matter how hard working you are, how much grit you have, you're just like digging in the wrong direction. But if you can read these alerts and change an environment and change your mind and change your team composition, change your product, change your go-to-market strategy, I think that's critical.
Number 8, ambitious.
Because in order to build something big, you need to think big. You got to have this way of thinking where you can just think about reshaping things, creating industries, changing the industries. It's a lot of self-confidence in that as well, but I think it's the premise. There's also another thing, there's ambitions when people want to succeed. This is kind of overlaps with a lot of resiliency, persistence, greed. When you want to change things so much that you have this desire to just continue. Despite failures, ups and downs, you have this ambition to do that and you're going to do it, no matter how hard it would be.
The model that you have as a VC firm is that you take a number of extremely risky investments because you're investing early stage, and the reality is most early stage companies don't work out. But that's okay, because the belief and the hope is that the few companies that do really succeed in a really big way. And that just doesn't happen if you haven't got a founding team that has huge ambition from day one.
Yes, that's it. They're looking for people that want to change the world. And that really takes us to the next one. Number 7, rebellious. Take it away, Saranga.
Founding a company is kind of a pretty rational thing to do. Most of the people who are founders are really smart, really able, often highly educated, talented people. They could very easily go and join, any number of large companies and be incredibly successful and have a pretty straightforward life. But they decide to throw all of that away and go into this crazy scenario where they're eating ramen every day and trying to do this thing that everyone else thinks is a crazy idea. And I think, again, to pull that, the reason why that gamble works is if the bet that you're making is sufficiently contrarian. If it isn't contrarian, if what you're doing is essentially a small iteration or an extra feature on something that already exists, then I think it's really hard to succeed, because whoever is doing something that's similar already will probably move into your space and probably do what you're doing. And even if not, the value you're adding on top of what's already there is minor. So you've taken all this risk, you've done all this crazy stuff, but the payoff is small. So for me, if you're going to be, a venture investor or an angel investor, if you're going to be, a startup founder, you need to start with an idea that's audacious. You need to be a person that's rebellious, because that's how you ensure you're taking almost enough of a risk to be able to actually make this crazy bet that you're taking with your life worth it. The other reason I pick rebellious is because I just like those people. At the end of the day, I enjoy working with people who, they have their dark days when things aren't working, but at the end of it, there's this small smile that creeps over their face and basically says, fuck it, I'm going to try again anyway tomorrow.
Number 6, focused. There's always options to go in all kinds of directions, but you have to make some hard choices. Focus on certain things. Take it away, Olga.
In my portfolio, I have this incredible person who is just like always example of staying focused. So he's doing intermittent fasting, and he designs his weekly schedule that when he does 24 hours intermittent fasting, he doesn't answer emails, he doesn't pick the calls, he's just grinding in accordance with things that are like on top of his list. And he does that twice a week. He lost a lot of weight. He looks absolutely great. He doesn't drink alcohol anymore. And, that's one of the most successful companies in my portfolio right now. It's a whole new level of staying focused and how you kind of optimize all of your routine to maintain this focus.
I remember at GitHub, Chris would always say, does it help the developer? Does it help the developer? And that was always the question. It was kind of the only question. Does it help the developer? And so, I find myself when I meet founders, like I ask them, okay, cool, you made something, you have this product, you have this service. What's your philosophy around it? Because when you go to the market, you're going to have a little bit of service and product and a little bit of philosophy about what you think this is going to bring to the market. And I think it's really important to stay focused on what you're doing and why you're doing it. And don't let people and things and events, whatever comes your way, change that focus. I think it's really important. And so I lived by that. Brought a lot of success to the company if we just stayed on one path.
What Paul says here is incredibly important. Chris, who was CEO and founder of GitHub, kept saying, does it help the developer? He did not want to do anything that didn't help the developer. It's really good to have some kind of overarching philosophy that keeps you focused. In GitHub's case, was it don't do anything that doesn't help the developer?
I would say that I quit as a CEO when I realized I was going to lose my focus. I spent almost 10 years building my company. By the end of that period, I was probably the world expert, certainly in the top 3 in the extremely narrow, focused world of online video advertising. I knew freaking everything that anyone could know about online video advertising at that point in time. But I'd known for a year or two that I was bored of that and that I really wanted to do other things. And it was when I realized that I wasn't going to be able to maintain that focus that I started to think, I've got to move on.
There's really a dual focus here. There is a personal focus for the founders and there's a focus for the company. You need to have a little bit of both. You don't have to do 24-hour fasting. You can, but you don't have to. Okay, we're halfway there. And remember, this list is ranked, so the most important stuff is up top. Number 5, curious.
I really love people, founders, whatever, people who are curious about how things could work differently. or curious about how things could work outside of their own pond, who don't really settle for one solution that is commonly accepted, like dogmatic almost approach, who are curious to try and fail and try again and pay attention to things that happen around them.
It's always great when you meet someone who says, let me tell you how this particular part of the world works, and let me tell you how I'm going to change it. And they can only make that leap if they are curious, right? If they really keep digging, keep asking why. They're it's like a 5-year-old, right? It's the classic kind of cliched thing about a 5-year-old. They always just say why, and you answer a question, they say why to that as well, and you answer that question, they say why again. And I think founders are a bit like that, and it can be annoying at times, but actually it's kind of what gives them their secret power.
I know founders that they have so many of these traits. They have they're curious about this weird thing, and they have this habit. And it's like, really, how'd you get into that? And then they have a story behind it. And then there might be 2 or 3 of those. So I think there is something to that. And it's just not the one thing they're making, but it's why you invest in people, because they might have a great idea, but boy, they're curious. They might have 3 or 4 more great ideas later.
Number 4, emotional intelligence and empathy.
When they talk to investors, they're going to build this rocket ship to Mars and it's amazing. And the investors want to hear that. But you got to ask them, how do they think about the market? And if they go to the market with the same rocket ship story, it's not going to work. And the market's going to say that's not real. And they're going to reject it. And they're not going to trust the company that's selling them the service. And they're going to move away. And the company's got to hear kind of both. They got to kind of hear the rocket ship story, but also the reality, so they know where their daily life is. So I think you need a founder who has emotional intelligence ingrained, and they know how to actually read the room and how to work with the room and how to be honest and trustworthy, but at the same time, tell the story of the future.
To do that really well over a sustained period of time requires emotional strength. And there's a great talk that Travis from Uber did at one point, where he talks about the sort of strain on being a founder and CEO because of these, subtly different narratives one has to have for different stakeholders. And how, as you say, it's the same narrative underlying. So it's not about being dishonest, but you have to be able to modify that. And the reality is there's a gap between each of these, right? What your employee knows and needs to know is different from what your investor knows and needs to know, and what your customer knows and needs to know. And he describes the gap in between those things as being an emotional weight that a founder has to, or a CEO has to carry. And actually that puts weight on you, and it's tiring and it's exhausting. And over time, it can really drag you down. And he talks very eloquently and actually very openly about some of his issues around anxiety and stress and all these sorts of things. And yeah, it's an amazingly important quality, I think, for people to be able to have. And it's not easy. And it's one of the things that makes this job makes that job really hard.
It's interesting how a founder has to have multiple hats and understand when to switch and what is expected of him or her, given where he is in his journey.
So this is not only about emotional intelligence and empathy. It's also about being adaptive in your empathy when you tell the story to different kinds of people. Number 3, passionate.
When shit hits the fan and you need to carry on, you need to have something that would just keeps you going. And to me, passion is that thing that keeps people going when things don't necessarily work as you want. You need to always be obsessed and believe and want something so much to completely ignore things that don't work. I mean, it definitely has downsides as well. I can't ignore things that don't work for too long.
What can I say? This is important. Passion can be the fuel that takes you through the hard times. Number 2, grit.
Grit is just the quality and the ability to just grind it out, even when absolutely everything is against you. I know I felt this at numerous points in my journey as a CEO myself. I remember somewhat fondly, somewhat painfully, weeks spent in places like New York, knocking on door after door after door, trying to sell, and basically getting no after no after no, and sometimes not even getting a no because the person wouldn't even bother turning up to the meeting. So, I just remember how painful that was, but also how, that grit that it sort of creates in you means that you just don't take no for an answer. Every company I have worked with goes through secondary or tertiary periods of this at some point. There's a competitor who brings something out that changes your model. There's a big player that suddenly moves into your market. The market changes underneath you, or you lose some critical people, or whatever it might be. And so I find that, you need a founding team that can just keep going in those moments and have the belief and just keep pushing.
No.
So to me, that's super important.
Sometimes I run into founders and they have this belief that their product is just amazing, and they believe that it's just going to get accepted by the market and people are going to start using it and it's just going to take off and they're going to have no problem making money with it. And I meet them, in the beginning. And then when I tell them, if you really want to go after the market, you really want to understand your customer, it is such a load of work. It's grit. It is gritty work where you spend months and months talking to customers, figuring out how they use your service versus another customer and figuring out how to make it better for a market in general and then a specific customer, weighing the balance between, do I accept all the requests or do I have a philosophy on how my service should work? So I don't think they understand the level of work needed to actually get product market fit and keep getting product market fit. But it is a lot of work. And it's just like anything else. If you prepare for a speech relentlessly, you'll give a great speech. And if you don't, you won't. And I think it's the same thing with a founder. They have to understand the level of work they're going to get into. And they don't. No one does, because you don't know until you start. You wouldn't start maybe if you knew, right? But then when you get into it, you got to have that passion that gives you and that allows you to have the grit to get through it all. So I think it's really important.
I think grit is also important because there are so many factors that don't really depend on the founders, like market timing, market environments, global pandemic, that just can't happen. Like this shit just can't happen and there's nothing you can do to control it. And this ability to perceive, ability to just, like you mentioned, guys, continue despite whatever is happening and finding that internal source of belief in yourself before other people believe in, it's super powerful, but it's also super rare. A lot of people give up before they have an opportunity to test, to validate their idea for substantial amount of time. People try 5 times and then they give up. And those people who choose to try 200 times, and they probably succeed.
That's right. You have to have the grit to keep going. And we are at number 1. Number 1, trustworthy.
Trustworthy may not sound like the sexiest word on the list, but it's really important. I always like to point out that the average marriage in the UK and the US is about 7 to 10 years. So that's what I'm doing. I'm getting married to the founders. And, it is guaranteed that just like any good marriage, there will be good times, but there will also be bad times. And if you're not at least honest with each other, it's so hard to make that work. So I just really, I don't mind that things will go wrong. I don't mind that mistakes will be made. But if we can at least be honest with each other, that helps. I think it's actually a very hard thing to measure for. You could ask the question, are you trustworthy? I think most people would. It's a classic logical tautology, right? Anyone who's not trustworthy would be untrustworthy and say yes. So it's very difficult to test in the short period of time that you have to get to know someone.
Yeah, you're right. It's hard to test in the beginning, but a sole founder who wants to build a team around them, I think that's dangerous. I think when you find somebody who has a whole crew that they've been with, even if it's 1 or 2 people, that says a lot for trustworthiness.
Once you have an untrustworthy relationship, people are not really there for each other. And when difficult stuff happens, it's very hard to have those direct conversations quickly that you need to have sometimes. Many companies go through touch and go moments. And if you can't, speak cleanly and clearly without politics in those moments, then it's really difficult to maintain success.
I agree that trustworthiness and credibility are one of the most important things, especially as Ranga said, as you're getting into this long-term marriage and hopefully without ugly divorce.
That's it for trust. But let's be really clear here. Investors will not back a founder they cannot trust. They all agree on that. We started out by saying that all founders are very, very different. And this is true. I've met all kinds of founders. That said, there are certain things that a founder needs to have. If you look at the top 5 here, I would say you need to have all of those. They are a requirement. And the rest of the list, you actually need most of them. Almost all of this top 10 is a requirement. If you want more content just like this, please consider pressing like and subscribe so you won't miss any future videos. Thank you very much for watching Raw Startup. Now stop watching and go build something.